Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gia. I'm a 25-year-old lady who lives in my mom's basement, and today is the first video in a new series that I will be starting called Sequel Saturday. It is a video dedicated to books that are sequels in series that I'd like to continue, whereas I will talk about them in the wrap-up, but I want to give them their own individual videos because they are books that I would like to continue. So about every other Saturday or one every 3 Saturdays, we will have a Sequel Saturday video. This is going to be a flexible project. This is, another thing that I'm adding on to the list of things that I wanted to do, but I felt as though it was the right decision because I could blabber on and on about some of these books because of how much I enjoyed the first in the series. So I wanted to give, the books following their own videos. I finally picked up A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses about a month and a half ago, and I really, really loved it. There were a couple of things that I had to say. Of course, I had some things to say about Tamlin as a character, which of course that was supposed to be, raised some red flags for me. But I think overall the book is incredibly well written, especially for Feyre at the time being illiterate, and Sarah J. Maas is quite flowery with her language use, to the point where I was pointing it out at certain times that the language being used was not something that, from the perspective of somebody who was illiterate, would be language that would be used. However, it was still well written nonetheless. When I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, I rated it 4 stars, and I still feel strongly about that 4-star rating. It wasn't perfect, but I think that it was pretty well executed for a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I think that the characters are well rounded. I think that it is a very well crafted universe, and I was very curious to see where the series would go. I, of course, did not come into the series blind. I have had eyes and ears the past couple of years, so I do know that I do know a couple of things about the series. I know that Feyre and Tamlin do not end up together in the end, but I did appreciate that in the first book we had kind of not a love triangle, but we have a bit of a switcheroo where, walking into it knowing that Feyre does not end up with Tamlin. It was interesting to see how she fell in love with him in the first place and how he rescued her from where she was in life and genuinely cared about her. But because of what they went through under the mountain and because of Amarantha, they emerged at the end of the book as very broken people. And from the very start of the book, we see some of the lingering effects from what happened to Feyre, because she makes a lot of really good points in the beginning of A Court of Mist and Fury. So for those of you who might not know, you probably do. A Court of Mist and Fury kicks off with Feyre in Springcourt, and she is engaged to Tamlin. She's basically retelling like what's happened over the last couple of months. Tamlin is sort of treating her like she could break at any moment, and she is feeling as though she doesn't need that protection. That old Feyre would have relished in the fact that now she can just sit back and be protected by Tamlin. Now she feels useless because she was reborn as an immortal person who has all of these feelings, and of course later on she realizes she has all these powers she didn't know that she had, but now she feels useless because everybody is worshiping her as this savior when all she can think about is the atrocities that she committed, mostly the murder of the 2 fairies in the last task. So I can understand why she feels this way, that all she feels is guilt despite the fact that she saved the entire world. I usually don't like first-person perspectives. I usually prefer a third-person or third-person omniscient, just because I like to kind of picture myself as a part of the story, but like pictured in the room, like I'm a fly on the wall. I don't always like to hear somebody's inner thoughts because sometimes internal monologue can be really annoying. But I think that in particular, Sarah J. Maas does an excellent job of writing post-traumatic stress and how it can affect somebody and their decision-making, like the decisions that Feyre makes into leaving Springcourt. Feyre is feeling stifled. She is feeling suffocated. She is feeling like all Tamlin is doing is holding her in the palms of his hands like broken shards of glass, and she does not feel that. She wakes up from these nightmares and pukes her guts up, and all he does is lock her in the house, and she starts to feel stressed and claustrophobic from being locked up because she just feels like she needs room to breathe and room to be free. But Tamlin believes that it is too dangerous for her and that she just needs to like sit and rest, but she doesn't want to do that. In the last book, Rhysand kind of magically tattooed Feyre with some night court tattoos, and it created a telepathic link between the two of them, that he could feel the emotions that she was feeling from far away. And at the time, she did not know this, but in a particular time when Tamlin had locked her up, Rhysand came to rescue her. Rhysand kind of opened the cage to the scared Feyre, and she was able to walk out of the spring court free. She breaks her engagement with Tamlin. She walks away from him completely just because she is unable to be the kind of trophy wife, the trophy savior by his side. She also had some pretty sour tastes in her mouth about how Tamlin treated some of his subjects. There was an incident with a water wraith who came up to him to pay the tithe, and she said that there are no fish in the pond, so they have no food and they have nothing to give. Tamlin tells her that she has 72 hours to turn over what she is due for the tithe, or she will pay with her life. And Feyre finds this disgusting. As somebody who lived in poverty and in near starvation for many years of her life and most of her adolescence, to the point where she was poorly educated and couldn't read or write, and that was all she did was basically provide for her family when they couldn't. Feyre finds this abhorrent, and she decides to give the water wraiths a piece of her own jewelry, a piece of jewelry that she will not miss, that she has only worn once, and that is honestly something that she doesn't need. And she gives it to the water wraith, and she says, take this, sell it, buy the fish that you need, and use it to pay your tithe. The water wraith says that she will never forget this justice that she has done for her. And everybody kind of looks at Feyre and says, like, nobody would ever, like, do this for a lesser fairy. There's a lot of discourse between the class race between high fae and anybody that's considered not high fae or just considered lesser fairies. And this is something that a lot of characters feel particularly strongly about. Rhysand is one of them, to say that there really is no difference between them except class, except who they are and what powers that they have and who they happen to be born to be is the only difference between them. So he believes that, like, there should be more of an equal playing field for all of the fairies to live in harmony and together. Rhysand is written to be our book boyfriend. He is brooding, he is hot, he is fighting for justice. He is literally everything. And I'm honestly seeing why Cindy used to call him like the feminist king, because all he ever does is whenever Feyre is presented with a choice, he just kind of takes a step back and tells her, well, it's your choice. It's, you know, the original feminist king, which I understand why that's such a meme, but within the context of the story, if I were to take it from a critical perspective, Feyre was essentially rescued from the spring court by Rhysand. Feyre was hidden away in the house, locked up, safe, where nobody could get their hands on her. Everything was decided for her. She wasn't even planning her own wedding. She had no energy to do anything. Rhysand was always making comments about how living in Springcourt she was wasting away and not taking care of herself because she didn't have the energy to. She felt so stifled that she was unable to take care of herself. So the complete opposite to that is Rhysand telling her that she has a choice in every decision that she has, which is completely understandable. But Rhysand is also prioritizing her safety in that he's always there keeping an eye on her, but ultimately anything that affects her, she has the choice to involve herself and to what degree. So in the spring court, when Feyre would ask Tamlin to go with him to do certain things, he would always say, no, I don't want you to come with me because it is too dangerous. It is, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want anybody to see you or get their hands on you. We don't know what kind of powers you might have, and we don't want this to make you a risk. And she's like, but I can't stay locked up here. Rhysand, on the other hand, fights her a little bit, but then says, you know what, you can come, but you need to listen. You need to do what I say. And you need to watch yourself. And another thing that is completely opposite between Tamlin and Rhysand is that Tamlin didn't want Feyre to train because if they were discovered that she was training, he thought that people would see this as she was a weapon. And he would just prefer to hide her away and basically make people forget that she was there because he felt as though that was the best way to keep her safe. But then it was also putting her at risk if she was developing all these powers and didn't know how to control them, that she could destroy herself or go mad from not letting loose all that power. Basically, become a ticking time bomb. And she didn't want that either. But she also wanted to know what was going on with her own body. I mean, here she is, like she was a human made immortal and doesn't know what's happening to her own body. So, of course, she wants to figure that out. She doesn't really know that much about what it's like to be a fairy, much less a high fae, what it means, what powers she might have. She probably, at this point in this story, barely knew the powers of everything, because every time a new power would, come up in her, she would ask to the air or to the person that was with her, like, oh, where did this power come from? And we are, as the readers, able to identify and basically connect the dots, be like, oh, this power came from here. Her fire powers came from the autumn court, and her power to control darkness and, hide into the shadows came from the night court, and shapeshifting came from spring court. She needs to learn how to use her powers, not just to figure it out so she can not explode like a ticking time bomb, like I said, but also learn about her new identity and learn about who she is, because she's changed. She has acknowledged multiple times in the story that she's a completely different person than she was before she went under the mountain, that old Feyre would have been perfectly fine to let Tamlin kind of keep her safe and sequestered away in the house and letting her paint for the rest of her days. But now she can't even look at red paint without thinking about blood. And I think that that's sad and that's tragic, because she changed so much from this person who was fighting for her life, literally, and then had to fight for her life again and fight for Tamlin's. And then when she took a step back and she realized that Tamlin did not fight for her nearly as hard as she fought for him, and she quite literally gave her life for him, that now he wants to hide her away like she's a trophy. And she doesn't want to be that. She wants to be useful. She wants to do something with the life that she now has, the second chance, the immortal life she now has. So I understand where she's coming from, where this internal struggle is coming from, where she feels as though she loves Tamlin, but she's literally going crazy, not doing anything. Now that I've blabbered about PTSD and how well it's written for like the past 15 minutes, I want to discuss how I feel about Feyre and Rhysand, which I feel is another plus to this story. I could not put this book down. I'd say at this point, it's almost 11 p.m. on a Friday night, and this video is supposed to be up tomorrow morning, and I have 20% of this book left, and I just wanted to talk about my thoughts about how I feel about the first 80% of the book in more of a reading vlog style, and then I want to come back and discuss the last 20% in its own like next section. At the point where I'm at right now, Feyre and Rhysand have accepted the fact that they have feelings for each other, and then Feyre then finds out from the Suriel that she is Rhysand's mate, and Rhysand has known this for quite some time. He figured it out when they were under the mountain, and he felt the bond click into place, but he didn't say anything to Feyre because he didn't want her to run. She, of course, freaks out about this because he didn't tell her something, and that was something that they had discussed prior, that they would always be honest with each other, and they're always doing the truth for a truth bargain thing where they are slowly getting to know one another throughout the story. So, of course, she immediately freaks out. Like, how could he not tell her something this big about something that is definite and is about her, that has something to do with her? So this brings up a lot of reactions from what happened with Tamlin, that she had no choices to the consequences that were happening to her, that things basically happened to her. She did not have any decisions in what had happened to her. Finding out that she was Rhysand's mate from a third-party source, and then finding out that he knew all along and that others knew and she was kept in the dark, I understand why she was upset about this. Then she sat in a cabin for 72 hours and realized, I also understand why he didn't tell me, because he knew that I would react like this. And so when she talked to Rhysand and he said, when I figured this out, you were still with Tamlin. You still loved Tamlin. If I showed up and said, by the way, you're my mate, you would have freaked the fuck out on me and beat me the fuck up in the same breath. Saying to her all he ever wanted to do was basically give her a choice and not force her into something that permanent, that he, when she called for him, opened the door to the night court to let her come in to get away from what she was experiencing and let the bond form naturally. That, you know, that bond may have clicked into place and he may have felt it, but they didn't have as developed as a relationship in the beginning of the story as they do at this 80% mark, where they are acknowledging, despite the mating bond, that they have feelings for each other and that they want to explore those feelings. But now that they realize that they are mated, I am assuming that things will progress at a much faster rate. I don't think they're going to be married by the end of the book or anything. I'm sure that they're not going to be, but I can only imagine the kind of stress that I would be under if, like, somebody who I was introduced to as my enemy then tells me, by the way, we're supposed to be together like for the rest of forever because we're immortals. I would have been very confused and a little bit disgusted. So I am understanding as to why the both of them made these decisions. So, like I said, I really enjoy their relationship development. I talked about this a teeny bit in the reading vlog that's going to go up on Monday. I do appreciate the movement from not enemies, but maybe adversaries, well, maybe perceived enemies, to adversaries, to tentative allies, to peers, to allies, to friends, to lovers, to mates. I do appreciate the very distinct steps that we made in this process that S.J. Mass wrote for us, because this is something that I don't see very often. It's very like 0 to 100, or it's very like giving in to the lust, where they're enemies and then they realize, oh my God, they're so hot. And then they just start, you know, having sex. It's very, in a lot of stories, and enemies to lovers is great, but it is very much fueled by the fact that they're hate fucking. So um, it's nice to see that they're moving in stages and they're moving in steps. The enemies to friends to lovers is like the 3 steps, but it is further broken down than that because they were allies before they were friends, and that's a very distinct step. I do appreciate it because, you know, I walked into this knowing that they end up together, but it was nice to see how their relationship formed despite the mating bond that I knew was there and that I knew they were going to end up together. But it was nice to see, again, how they got there. This book is, in my experience so far, this book has been much more pleasant of a reading experience than the first book. Not that the first book was bad. I gave it 4 stars, of course, but it did like take me a little bit longer to get hooked. But this book had me hooked from the very start. It's been hard to put down. I've been angry that I haven't had time to read, and now I'm finding myself where I need to, you know, finish reading it, and I have 20% of it left, and I just wanted to kind of get all my thoughts out now while I was at the 80% mark, because I know things are going to start tumbling towards the end here as it prepares to go into the next book. So I am wondering what is going to be the cliffhanger. Where are Feyre and Rhysand going to be at in the stages of their relationship by the end of this book? Like, where is it gonna stop before we go into the next book? So I'm going to take a pause here and I'm going to finish the book as quickly as possible because I am addicted, and then I will come back and discuss.
A few moments later.
I feel like 7,000 things just happened, but oh my God. Okay, so the second I picked up the book again at the 80% mark, like immediately things just started happening. Like I was like, oh man, like I wonder what's gonna happen. Like when's the other shoe gonna drop? So I picked back up at the scene where Feyre is in the cabin and Rhysand comes to get her after like 5 days of her being in there, and they kind of like just decide like we're gonna do this matey thing. And Rhysand went into the entire story. He told the entire story from his perspective without taking a goddamn breath, and I am astounded. Like, it's no wonder that like some of these fantasy men are our book boyfriends, because they're written by women, because they're literally like everything we want a man to say. Like, we want them to be vulnerable with their emotions and like acknowledge when they love us and stuff. So like I'm flabbergasted, truly. So we get the entire story, and oh my God, I was swooning. And they had a lot of sex. So good for them, honestly. Good for them. I got to hear about the massive fairy dick that we've been hearing about how the width of their wingspans, it says something about the size of their dick, but you know, we love that. And then immediately after this moment, the next day, they had the meeting with the Mortal Queens, and the younger one gave the other half of the book without saying anything and kind of betrayed the other one because there were 6 queens. One of them didn't show up to the first meeting because they said she was sick, and then it turned out to be a lie. So then there was 5 queens, and then at the second meeting, only 2 of them showed up. And one of them, it was a really old one, and then the second one was the one that Feyre like felt like would be the most receptive to what they were saying. So that queen gave them the second half of the book, and in return for showing that they are being truthful for what they say, Rhysand shows them Valeris. He shows them, I don't understand how they did this, because like he showed them what Valeris is, but he didn't say where it was. But I guess like kind of like how like teleportation works in some fantasy universes, that you don't exactly need to know where something is, you just need to be able to picture it in your mind. So I guess that's maybe, or maybe it's like a tracking of like a magic signature or something that the King of Hybern was able to do, because he seems to have like a lot of mysterious powers that a lot of people don't have, which is a bit weird. So then we start tumbling into a sequence of events that was a little bit confusing at first. Like I had to make sure I was reading things correctly just so I wasn't missing anything, because there was a lot of twists, there was a lot of turns, and I'm a little itty bitty confused. But like, holy shit, the twists did not the twists did not end until the very last page. So the other 5 mortal queens betrayed the trust of the Fae and the 6th queen that gave the book to Feyre and the Night Court, and told the King of Hybern where Valeris was, and basically tried to exterminate the city. And then they also dropped the body of the 6th queen on the ground, basically, and killed her for retribution for what she had done. It was basically just a show of power to show that they could. They ransacked the city, killed a lot of people. And it was then, right then and there, that the Night Court troop kind of decided that they needed to infiltrate the King of Hybern's castle, which maybe I understand that like Azriel was doing a lot of things behind the scenes, like infiltrating everything, but I wanted a little bit more detail about. I understand what he was doing. He was like learning the guard schedules and stuff, but I think I can't even say like I wish I had a chapter from his perspective, but I almost wish I did. Like I wish I had a little teensy bit more information about what he did, because then it was like all of a sudden this is the castle, Azriel knows everything, and we're going to go down to the basement and steal the cauldron. Well, then all of a sudden when they try to use the book to nullify the cauldron, Jurian shows up. He's been brought back from the dead, and they shoot Azriel, and they are brought forth to the King of Hybern and discover that Tamlin has betrayed everybody. And in an effort to get Feyre back, he has made a bargain with the King of Hybern to basically let the king destroy the wall south of the Spring Court and just let them into the mortal land in return for his cooperation, so he can get Feyre back, because he is still under the illusion that Feyre was stolen from him, even though she has told him many times to stay away from her. And it's obvious that the king is not being completely truthful, because we know for a fact that he wants to take over the mortal lands, but he is presenting himself as an ally to the mortal queens by saying, oh, I'm going to give you immortality, and then we will all be united together, when in actuality that's not what he wants. He wants to take over the human land, so he's like double crossing them by making a bargain with them, only to turn his back on them later. So they walk in and they want to be made immortal with the cauldron. So another double cross on top of this is that we find out that the priestess Ianthe, who was the priestess in the Spring Court, double crossed Tamlin to the King of Hybern to reveal where Nesta and Elaine were, and then they were put in the cauldron as a test to show the mortal queens that it worked. So Elaine and Nesta were turned into Fae. And then, of course, the second that Elaine and Lucian look at each other, we have another mating pair on our hands, which, of course, I know that Nesta and Cassian are another one, but they have yet to confront their issues. Cassian is also injured, and his wings may not be repairable, so I'm unsure if he will be able to fly in the future, if this is something that he will have to grapple with. Realizing that they're running out of options really quickly, and seeing that how Tamlin has betrayed them, and then Ianthe betrayed Tamlin, and now Tamlin is shook because none of this was part of the bargain. So now the King of Hybern is just rolling over everybody and doing whatever he wants. Feyre realizes that they are super duper fucked, so she fakes breaking a curse. She uses her power from the Day Court to kind of look like she's emitting light out of her, like she's breaking the curse, and she pretends to have broken whatever potential curse that Rhysand would have put her under, and then tells Tamlin to take her home, which she is basically pretending that Tamlin was right, which she's able to communicate with Rhysand at the same time. But those powers allowed her to break the wards for a certain amount of time so that Rhysand and the others could get out along with her sisters. So Feyre puts on the Oscars performance of the year to tell Tamlin, take me home, take me home. I don't want to be here anymore. And then Tamlin looks at the King of Hybern and says, okay, like, let me take her. Like, you've made our bargain. You've gone too far. You know, I'll take her, and then you can do what you want with the rest of them. So they said, okay. And then Rhysand is playing along because he and Feyre are still able to communicate with each other. So he's getting ready to, like, get them the fuck out. And then in another attempt to make it real, Feyre looks at the King of Hybern and says, okay, now break the mating bond. This was, you know, forced upon me. She says to break the mating bond. And Rhysand is like, oh my God, no. Oh my God, no. And then I was like, oh my God, can this actually happen? Can they, like, magically break mating bonds? Like, that seems convenient for the time. So the connection between them is broken. And then the second that it's broken and Feyre says, like, okay, take me home then, Morgan and Rhysand get everybody the fuck out of there. And then they realize, like, oh shit, what did Feyre do? And then they take Feyre back to the Spring Court. Lucian is still, like, head stuck in the clouds that Feyre is back at home. So she is, like, putting on her Oscars performance of the year, truly snaps for her. So that's happening. Meanwhile, we get a random Rhysand chapter when they get back and they are like, oh my God, where's Feyre? Because they're not in her head. So, like, they don't know what she's thinking. They're like, what the fuck happened? Where is Feyre? Why did she do this? What the fuck is happening? And then Rhysand is like, he broke the mental bond between us on the tattoo on her left hand that, like, was the bargain that we made under the mountain where she had to be with me 1 week out of every month. But what they didn't know is that last night, me and Feyre went to the temple to the high priestess and I made her my high lady, a thing that up until now did not exist. So high ladies are not a thing because in fairy world, there is no high lady. There's just queen consort, or there's just the high lord's mate, in that she is basically lady of the house, but not in name or power or position. She just kind of does the things around the house and has his kids, and that's about it. But what Rhysand did is make Feyre his equal in every way, position, power, and magic. So this was a huge twist. So they didn't get married. They, like, declared their mating bond completely. So they went and, like, had the mating bond declared official, and then he made her his high lady. So he said if they took off the other glove, they would have seen the twin tattoo on her other hand. So they severed the wrong tattoo. She's the high lady of the night court now. She's privy to all of our powers, and she's still my mate, so I can communicate with her. And now she's our spy. And the others are like, what the fuck? You just put your mate in enemy hands. And he's like, no. Now she's our spy, and she's gonna play along. So then, flashback to Spring Court, when Tamlin has, like, stars in his eyes that Feyre is back. Lucian is kind of, like, suspicious of this, but Rhysand and the Night Court took Nesta and Elaine. So his mate is now not with him. So he looks at Feyre and kind of squints at her, realizing that Tamlin unwittingly let Rhysand's mate and spy into the Spring Court. But if he tells Tamlin, then he can't get his mate back. So now Lucian is guilty by association, which, honestly, I liked him. I always liked Lucian more than Tamlin, so I only can hope that in the end, Lucian ends up allied with the Night Court in the end, because he is the son of the Autumn Court, and now he's, like, with the Spring Court. Like, he can hop courts. It's fine. I am obsessed. There was so many twists, so many turns. I feel like the last 20%, a million things happened. I kept having to go back and forth, but I honestly couldn't even predict like what could have happened. Like I sometimes when I'm reading certain books, I'm able to kind of predict what's going to happen, or I read it and go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But like this had so many jumps that weren't illogical, but they were just so surprising, like one after the next, that they just kind of all fit together. And once all the pieces fell together, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. They did it. They coming out on top and the enemies don't even know it. To make a long story short, 5 stars for A Court of Mist and Fury. And honestly, I don't give 5 stars often. It is a very rare instance for me to give a 5 star rating to something. And this is just so good. Between just the relationship development between Feyre and Rhysand, and how SJ Maas discusses PTSD and grief and the processing of, was just so good. The first person perspective was enriching to the story. Feyre figuring out all her powers. She really can do it all. I mean, you could say she's not really a Mary Sue though. Like I'm sure some people that are critics would say that Feyre is a Mary Sue because she can do literally everything, but she does have her faults in her character, in that she tends to run away from her issues. She has trouble confronting. She kind of withdraws into herself, but then she also doesn't like to be confined by others. So she kind of um, withdraws into herself, but then the second that somebody else is forcing her down, she has the need to run away from all of her issues. I think that after what happened to her, how she was forced to kill people and the grief that she carries, I think she now feels the need to continuously prove herself instead of allowing herself to sit back, because then all she has to think about is the grief and the harm that she caused to a few people in the efforts to save thousands. So she's kind of busying herself in that way to not have to process her grief. So potentially, like, doing more and continuing to do things will help her forget about it or stifle it, but it won't make her forget it. And I think that that's something she'll have to combat in the future, that like she did have to end some lives in order to save the majority. But what gets brought up a lot is the fact that she is an immortal person with a mortal soul, and that she's probably always going to feel that weight, and that part of her in a way will always remain human. And I think that that's beautiful. Honestly, I want to pick up Wings and Ruin, but like the next sequel Saturday is going to be the sequel to the Bridge Kingdom, so I have to like put it on hold. But like, this was so good. So good. It makes me so excited to continue reading the series. I want to see what happens next. I want to see how they defeat the king, because he seems so untouchable. And that's what I like about villains, is that I hate when they spill you their whole spiel. So I can only imagine how they're going to defeat him, and it only makes me excited for how they're going to do it, because he seems so mysterious and so powerful. Honestly, in the end, it could be his own hubris that gets him killed. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Jurian turns on him, because he also seemed to be horrified by the things that the king was doing. He also seems to be singularly minded in getting back Miriam after being told that she was dead, and then finding out that she was alive, and that she basically spurned him for somebody else because it was her mate. And the story is very, very similar to Tamlin, Feyre, and Rhysand, because there was a line that the king said where it said Feyre left Tamlin only to find her mate, specifically to say that Feyre didn't leave Tamlin for Rhysand, but Tamlin and his actions pushing Feyre away to Rhysand helped her find her mate, which I think is a really big distinction, because Feyre is always having these feelings that like she's a hoe because she basically went from Tamlin to Rhysand, but there was a span of time between the two, and there were reasons, and of course the mating bond in general is also a huge reason. That's a really big thing to the Fae. So I think that that line is pretty distinct and is important. But Jurian, Mirian, and Draken, which is a dumb name, their story is very similar, so I can only imagine if there's going to be some parallels like more parallels between Jurian and Tamlin, because we're already seeing them, because Tamlin betrayed like all of Feyland to go align himself with the king to get Feyre back, much like how Jurian is aligning himself with the king to get Miriam back. Like he's in this on this quest to go get her back. So I can only imagine like how the characters are going to continue to grow from this, but I also am super curious to see like what happens now that Feyre is like a little spy in the spring court, and then how Lucian kind of factors into the whole thing. Like, is he going to side with Feyre? Is he going to betray Tamlin, essentially? I think in the end he's going to. I mean, I think he has to, because Elaine is his mate. So, like, I think Lucian is going to be Team Night Court, but I want to see, like, how we get there. What's the process? To close out this reading vlog, I'm obsessed. This was so good. 5 stars, and I can't wait to read the next one. If you stuck around to listen to my blabbering, thank you so much. I'm going to quickly edit this to prepare this to upload, but thank you so much. Remember to drink water and be nice to each other and exude kindness and empathy with everything that you do. I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope to see you there. Bye!